All right, everyone. So let's talk about variables. Now, variables are a very, very important concept in Kotlin and indeed in every software development language, because variables allow us to store a value for some piece of information and then modify it, update it, use it in our code. So I want you to think about variables as something like a container for data, okay? It's like a little box where we can put some information about something in our program. So just to give you a completely random example, you could have, an online shop, and you could have some people that come into your online shop and put products in their basket, right? So you would store in that basket, you would store the information as a variable, and you would store the product name, you would store the product price, you would store all this information, you would store them as variables. Now, here is how we create a variable in Kotlin. Okay, so we have a keyword. The keyword is var. And then you give the variable a name, whatever you would like that name to be. We will discuss what the name can be in the next video. And you have an equal sign. To assign a value, you put it, for instance, like this in quotes. We assign a string to our variables. Okay, so I have here the variable TV shows watched, many. Okay, so I do tend to watch too many TV shows. So if I want to show that, I can store that information in a variable as a string. Also, another example, you have a var dogs, okay? And that can be a number, for instance. We will discuss numbers in a future section of our course, but you can kind of intuitively understand what numbers are, so we can store the value 3 in our dogs variable. All right, so variables can change. So we can have, for example, age. So we create a variable called age equals 25. We can say age equals 26. So we have changed that variable or the value of that variable to 26. Also, we can use variables to define other variables. Okay, so for instance, here we have a variable new age that is age plus 1. Okay, so the system will take the value of the variable age that we have defined here and changed here and add plus 1 to it. So for instance, here we have, since we defined the variable as 25, then updated it as 26, then our new age will be 26 plus 1 is going to be 27. So let's go ahead and try this out in our IDE. All right, so here we are in our IDE. I have created a new file and a new run configuration to test out the information, the code in this lecture, but you don't necessarily have to do that. You can use your own project, the file you created previously, or you can create your own as you like. So for instance, let's go ahead and create our first variable. So we're going to say var something like TV shows equals quotes many. All right, just a word of warning before we go any further. If you download the slides and you copy and paste the information here, make sure you change these quotes, because the IDE doesn't understand the quote from here, so you have to change that manually, or you can just type this like I did now. All right, moving on, we're going to say print line TV shows, and let's just go ahead and run this and make sure that our variable is defined as many. We get a printout many, because here we're printing out the value of our variable TV shows. All right, so let's go ahead and change our variable. I'm going to say TV shows equals too many. Okay, so now if I print line again, okay, TV shows, what do you think is going to come out here? Okay, so maybe pause this video, take a guess, and then we're going to continue on and see if you are right. All right, so running this, we can see that we have our variable TV shows. We are printing out that variable. We get the value here. And then we change our variable. And then we have a print line TV shows too many. Now, importantly, to change a variable, we no longer need the keyword var here, okay? So we just need the keyword var when we define our variable, but not when we change it or when we use it later on, okay? So this is just for the definition. It's only needed one time. All right, there we go. Now, moving on. We cannot change a variable's type. Okay, so we will discuss more about variable types. There are different types of variables. So for instance, here we saw one type, which is strings that we already know about, one type, which is number that we will discuss in a future section. And there are more types of variables that we will go throughout our course. But importantly, we cannot change a variable's type. So for instance, if we define our age to 25, and then we try to put our age to many, then we will get an error, okay? We cannot, if this is a number, we cannot assign a string to it. So let's try that out in our code here. So we're gonna say var age equals 25. And then if I try to do age equals many, already you can see that the IDE won't let me. It signifies that it has detected an error. We have a type mismatch. It's required int, which is a keyword for number. We will see that later on in the course. And it has found a string, which we know what it is, right? So we're trying to assign a string to a variable of type int or number, okay? So that is not possible. So let me just comment out this code. I hope you remember how to do that. It's control or command /. Okay, so we've commented out the code. If we run it, then we're simply gonna get the result from this side of our code. All right, so let's see what types of variables we have. So we have two types of variables that I've kind of symbolized here with two boxes. One is an open box and one is a closed box. So the difference here is that our variable that is open is changeable, or we call that mutable, okay? In software development speak, it's called mutable. And we have a unchangeable, read-only, or immutable variable, okay? And we have two types of variables. We have two keywords that we use to define these types of variables. So we have seen the var keyword. We define a variable that can be changed. And we have another keyword, val, that is used to define a variable that cannot be changed. So let's see this in practice. So for instance, we have a variable color defined as var equals blue. That is okay. And then we change the value of that variable to red, and that is also okay. But if we have a val, or sometimes called a value, but we can still call it a variable, color equals blue, that is fine. But if we then try to change the value of that variable to red, then we get an error, okay? Because this is a immutable variable. Okay, so let's try that out in our code. We have here val color equals blue, that is fine. And then we have color equals red. And we can see that the IDE has already detected that we cannot change, we cannot reassign this value, okay? So if we do need at some point in code to change this value, then we need to replace the val with a var, and that solves our problem. But if we have a val, this will not work. So I'm just gonna comment it out. All right, so there we go. That's all for now about variables. There's a lot more to be said about them, and we will say all that needs to be said. We will go through all the information, but for now, it's a good first step into the world of variables in Kotlin. All right, so since we've spoken about strings, let's talk a bit about chars. Now, chars are kind of another concept in Kotlin in software development, which basically means it's a single character, okay? And we represent that within the language in Kotlin as a character surrounded by single quotes. So if a string is surrounded by double quotes, a char is surrounded by single quotes. So here are some examples. We have the character A, capital A, the lowercase n, and here I have just an empty space. Okay, so all of these are characters. Anything surrounded by single quotes is a character. Now, importantly, a string is composed of characters, of chars. Okay, so that's why we call it a string. It's a string of chars. So that is basically what you would get. We will learn this later in our course, but if you take a single character out of a string, you get a char. Okay, so you could either get a string made out of a single character or a char. There are two different variable types, and we will learn more about variable types later. It's only important at this point that you familiarize yourself with the concept of a char. All right, so in this video, we're going to talk about variable names. So basically, what name can you give your variable? And that is actually quite an important topic because the name of the variable has to give some information to the reader about the variable, okay? About what it is for, what it is useful for, why the developer created it, and so on. Now, variable names are not relevant to the program. Okay, so that means the system doesn't really care what you call the variable. And actually, when it's compiled, when it's interpreted, the variable names get changed to something that you would not recognize, but the system, the computer understands. But as developers, when we create a program and when we try to read someone else's program, it's very important that the variable names do mean something so that it's easier for us to understand what it's useful for. Right, so it's easier to understand what a variable named, purchase price, what it is for, rather than call it that variable, calling it A1, right? So that doesn't make any sense. Purchase price, you immediately know what that variable refers to, what it stores. So what can you name your variable? So names can contain pretty much anything. So they can contain letters, can contain numbers, and can contain underscores. Okay, so some way to separate your variable name. Now, importantly, they cannot contain spaces, because a space is a delimiter. So if the system encounters a space, then it would think that the name of the variable is finished. But if you put letters, numbers, underscores, all of those are fine. Now, names of variables must start with a letter or an underscore. You cannot start a variable name with a number. So you can put numbers in, just not at the beginning. And names can be anything except Kotlin keywords. So for instance, you can't name your variable var, okay? Because var is a keyword used to create variables, and that will kind of throw the system off and it won't understand what you mean. So try to give it a name that is relevant, that gives some information about the variable, but nothing related to Kotlin keywords. Okay, so we have an example here. We cannot give the variable name var because that's the keyword we use to create that variable. So this needs to be something else. Now, importantly, println is not a keyword in Kotlin. So you could, in principle, name your variable println, but as we've seen previously, println is the name of a function that is quite extensively used. So it might not be a good idea to give your variable a name println. Okay, so like I said here, it's okay, but really you shouldn't do it because it confuses people that are trying to read your code and to understand your code. Also, you want to give your variables names that are not too long. Okay, so they need to be relevant. You can have a one word, a shortcut of a word. You can give 1, 2, 3 words, but putting in like 20 words in the name of a variable becomes quite cumbersome when you're trying to access and use that variable. So keep it quite short and to the point. Now, there is a naming convention in Kotlin. So how would you name a variable that has multiple words? So the naming convention is called camel case, and I found this nice image that kind of symbolizes the camel case convention. So you start off the variable name with a lowercase letter, and then every word that comes after that, you capitalize it. Okay, so I have an example here. My dog is funny. So you can see the dog is a capital D is capitalized, is with a capital I, F with a capital F, and so on. So if you want to put multiple words, you can, but it's always good to respect this naming convention because it makes things easier when somebody's trying to read your code to understand what you've done. Conventions do make it easier to understand.